For centuries, nearly every civilization on Earth has built its identity around gods, divine rulers, sacred laws, and eternal rewards for obedience. From Plato's divine order to the medieval cathedrals that crowned kings, belief wasn't just personal. It was law. It was science. It was morality and government, all fused into one unshakable truth. We're taught that disbelief, atheism, is a modern rebellion, born from arrogance, sin, or scientific pride, a rejection of meaning itself. But when you actually trace history, something shocking emerges. The first atheists didn't rise from arrogance or ego. They rose from honesty, from a refusal to lie about what they no longer believed. This is the untold story, how atheism didn't destroy meaning, but rescued it from manipulation. A story buried by power, rewritten by faith, and rediscovered by reason. To understand how atheism truly began, we have to go back, long before Darwin, before Enlightenment thinkers, before even the word atheist existed. If you appreciate deep dives into hidden histories like this, consider joining our channel membership. It helps us keep these stories alive and uncensored. Because the question of disbelief didn't start in the modern world. It began in temples, in whispers, in moments when ordinary people looked at their gods and quietly asked, "What if none of this is true?" Imagine the courage that took. In a world where faith was law, where the priest's voice carried the weight of eternity, to even wonder if the gods were human inventions was an act of rebellion. Not against morality, but against manipulation. Long before atheism had a name, the seed of doubt was planted, not by rebels or heretics, but by thinkers who refused to settle for stories that didn't make sense. They watched as sacrifices were made to invisible powers, as fortunes were spent on temples, as wars were waged in the name of unseen beings. And they asked the question no one dared to speak aloud. What if belief itself was the illusion? That question spread quietly, hidden inside philosophy, art, and laughter. In ancient Greece, it appeared in plays mocking the gods. In India, it lived in materialist schools like Carvaka. In China, it took the form of calm skepticism that nature, not heaven, governed all things. Each of these moments was a spark of independence, a small rebellion against the machinery of faith. Because doubt, at its core, isn't destruction. It's an instinct for truth. The same instinct that makes a child ask why when the answers stop making sense. And though history tried to erase those voices, their echo remains. In every age where belief demanded obedience, someone, somewhere, whispered no. Atheism, then, didn't begin as denial. It began as honesty, as the courage to say, "I don't know." As the strength to admit that not knowing is better than pretending, to know what's false. This is the forbidden question, the one that power fears the most. Because once you realize you can live without their gods, you stop needing their permission to think. And that is where the story of atheism truly begins. Long before the word atheism existed, humans were already asking dangerous questions. In ancient Greece, a poet named Xenophanes looked at the gods of his time, Zeus with his thunderbolt, Aphrodite with her vanity, and said something almost unthinkable. If horses could paint, they would draw their gods to look like horses. It was satire, but it was also truth. He saw that religion reflected not divine perfection, but human projection. A century later, Democritus went further. He claimed everything, even the soul, was made of tiny, invisible particles, atoms No gods were needed to explain thunder or stars, just reason and observation. To the Greeks, this wasn't blasphemy, it was philosophy. A search for wisdom, not rebellion. Doubt wasn't evil. It was curiosity, the mind's way of peeling back illusion to see what was real. And Greece wasn't alone. In ancient India, a school of thought called Carvaka rejected the authority of holy books entirely. They believed that no afterlife existed, that heaven and hell were inventions of priests used to control the fearful. They taught that only the senses, what we can see, touch, and experience, were worthy of trust. Their philosophy was simple: enjoy this life, because this life is all you have. Across the world, in China, another quiet revolution was unfolding. Laozi, whose teachings became the foundation of Taoism, spoke not of divine kings or jealous gods, but of the Tao, a natural order that needed no creator. He wrote, "The Tao that can be spoken is not the eternal Tao," meaning any god that could be described was already too small to be real. These were not rebels screaming against temples. They were thinkers observing nature and realizing that the universe didn't seem to need divine supervision. And yet, not every civilization welcomed such freedom. In Babylon, priests guarded their gods with fear. To question them was to challenge the entire social order. The temples weren't just houses of worship. They were banks, archives, and courts. Their priests held economic power, and their gods justified it. To ask whether those gods were real was to threaten the system itself. In ancient Hebrew traditions, doubt was no longer curiosity, it was sin. The scriptures demanded absolute loyalty. You shall have no other gods before me. To doubt that command was to invite divine punishment. And so, slowly, a shift began. Where once philosophy had explored, now theology began to police. Belief became law. Questioning became defiance. The thinkers, who once asked, "Why?" were replaced by prophets who demanded, "Believe." But still, in the cracks of history, those questions survived. Hidden in scrolls, whispered in taverns, passed between scholars who risked their lives to protect the right to think. Because deep down, even in the most devout civilizations, there were always a few who looked beyond the temple walls and felt the quiet pull of reason. They weren't denying the divine. They were reaching for the real. And for a time, that search was tolerated, even admired. But something changed. Questioning the gods stopped being curiosity and became treason. As civilization grew, faith stopped being a conversation and became an institution. In the great empires of Rome, Persia, and Byzantium, belief was no longer personal. It was political. It was law. The gods became extensions of the state, their temples, instruments of empire. Every prayer, every ritual, every offering reinforced the same idea. Power flows from the divine. In Rome, the emperor wasn't just ruler, he was a god himself. Loyalty to Caesar was loyalty to heaven. To doubt the gods was to doubt the empire. And that was treason. When Christianity emerged, it began as rebellion, a faith of the oppressed, a protest against the cruelty of Rome. But once it gained power, it learned the same lesson every empire had taught. Faith isn't just about saving souls, it's about controlling them. By the time the Roman Empire became Christian, belief had become a tool, a system for obedience. The church replaced the Senate, the cross replaced the eagle, and doctrine replaced debate. Now there were right beliefs, orthodoxies, and there were wrong ones, heresies. If you questioned Scripture, you weren't a philosopher anymore. You were an enemy of God. The punishment wasn't argument. It was silence, censorship, exile, and eventually, death. Because to control the gods was to control the people. And to control the people, you had to own their fear of eternity. The Inquisition was not born from faith. It was born from fear. Fear that the fragile illusion of divine authority could shatter under a single question. Across the Byzantine world, books were burned, thinkers erased, even memory itself was policed. Atheists, skeptics, and doubters were called corrupt, mad, possessed, not because they were evil, but because they were free. And freedom was the one thing power could not tolerate. For centuries, this was the price of curiosity. To ask why was to risk your life. To say, I don't believe, was to lose everything. Your home, your friends, your very name. Yet still, there were whispers, fragments, ideas that somehow slipped through the cracks. A monk copying manuscripts in secret. A philosopher hiding meaning in metaphor. A scientist disguising truth behind devotion. Reason didn't die. It hid, waiting for a world brave enough to let it breathe again. The age of heresy hunts, of burning questions instead of answering them, of silencing truth to preserve power. This was the moment belief became law. And once belief became law, truth no longer mattered. Only obedience did. But even in those dark centuries, behind the smoke of burned libraries and the walls of sacred courts, a flicker remained. The quiet, unkillable instinct to know. And yet, in the shadows of that control, something refused to die. The human need to know for ourselves. The world began to change. Slowly at first, then all at once. After centuries of silence, the air of Europe filled again with the dangerous sound of questions. It began in whispers, a scholar comparing forbidden texts, an artist sketching the human form not as divine perfection, but as living truth. The Renaissance was the rebirth of something the church had tried to bury: curiosity. The printing press became a weapon of liberation. Knowledge, once chained in monasteries, was copied, translated, and shared. And with every page that spread across Europe, the monopoly of faith began to fracture. For the first time in 1,000 years, people could read, think, and doubt for themselves. But the price of truth was still steep. Galileo learned that the hard way. When he pointed a telescope at the heavens and dared to say, "The earth moves around the sun," the church forced him to kneel, to recant, to swear that what he'd seen with his own eyes was a lie. He whispered, "And yet, it moves." That whisper became the heartbeat of a revolution. From Florence to Paris, from London to Amsterdam, a new fire spread, the fire of reason. Thinkers like Spinoza, banished from his community for heresy, argued that God was not a person, but nature itself, a universe governed by laws, not miracles. Voltaire mocked the cruelty of superstition with sharp wit and sharper courage. He wrote from exile, his words smuggled across borders like contraband. David Hume, quiet and meticulous, dismantled every argument for divine proof with logic so calm it felt almost merciful. Diderot, in his Encyclopédie, dared to collect human knowledge, all of it, and organize it without divine permission. His project was banned, censored, condemned, but it survived. And Percy Bysshe Shelley, centuries later, would be expelled from Oxford for writing an essay titled "The Necessity of Atheism." He was 19. These weren't godless men and women seeking to destroy faith. They were seekers, chasing truth through reason, not revelation. They asked, if the world can be explained by evidence, why do we still need fear to guide us? If morality can be grounded in empathy, why must we threaten eternal punishment to make people good? The courage of their doubt was the birth of intellectual freedom. For the first time, atheism had a name. At first, it was an insult, a slur whispered by priests to describe anyone who thought too freely. But slowly, that word was reclaimed. It became not a mark of shame, but of honesty. I do not know. I do not believe. I will not pretend. Each of these phrases became tiny acts of rebellion, and together they cracked the armor of dogma. In coffeehouses and salons, under candlelight and fear of arrest, men and women debated the nature of existence. If God was silent, perhaps reason could speak. If heaven was empty, perhaps meaning could be found here, on earth, in each other. The Enlightenment wasn't born overnight. It grew from centuries of buried doubt, from the voices that had whispered, "Why?" in the face of power. And when those whispers finally gathered into words, words into books, books into revolutions, the world began to see that truth was not a threat to faith. It was a threat to control. The church called it blasphemy. The monarchs called it treason. But the people called it freedom. Reason was reborn. And with it, so was the courage to live without fear of gods. But the most powerful revolution wasn't scientific. It was moral. For centuries, believers have asked the same question. If there is no God, what keeps us good? It's one of the oldest accusations against atheism, that without divine law, morality collapses, that without heaven or hell, human beings would sink into chaos. But history tells a different story. Long before sacred texts, long before commandments carved into stone, humans already knew compassion. We buried our dead with care. We shared food with the weak. We protected our children, not because we feared punishment, but because empathy was written into us. Goodness existed long before religion claimed it. And when philosophy finally caught up with human nature, thinkers began to prove it. Immanuel Kant argued that morality wasn't about divine reward or punishment. It was about duty. The recognition that some acts are right simply because they respect human dignity. Act, he said, as if your behavior were a universal law. No gods required, just conscience. John Stuart Mill offered another foundation, utilitarianism. The idea that morality grows from our ability to reduce suffering and increase well-being. The greatest good for the greatest number. A principle measurable in human happiness, not divine favor. Then came Friedrich Nietzsche, who shattered the illusion that morality had ever been purely divine at all. He said, God is dead, not as celebration, but as warning. He saw that humanity had outgrown its need for external commandments, and now had to create its own meaning. Our ethics, he argued, must come from life itself, not from fear of judgment. Through all these voices, a pattern emerged. Morality doesn't descend from heaven. It rises from us, from our capacity for empathy, from the shared experience of suffering and joy, from the reason that tells us that kindness sustains life and cruelty destroys it. The divine command theory says, we are good because God demands it. But reason asks, are we good because we fear punishment or because we feel compassion? The truth is uncomfortable for both believers and atheists. Because if morality is ours, then so is responsibility. We can't blame sin or Satan or divine mystery. The weight of choice rests on us. And yet, that realization isn't a loss of meaning. It's the birth of it. Modern secular ethics, what we now call humanism, doesn't ask people to worship perfection. It asks them to care, to build societies where fairness isn't sacred, it's practical. Where justice isn't divine, it's humane. Atheism didn't destroy morality. It revealed its source. And that source was never in the heavens. It was in the human heart. Across cultures and ages, the same moral truths appear. Do not kill. Do not steal. Protect the innocent. Help the weak. Not because a God commands it, but because we survive better when we live that way. Morality, stripped of myth, isn't hollow. It's stronger because it doesn't need fear to exist, only understanding. And yet, even after reason triumphed, belief still ruled. The question became, why? As reason rose, so did resistance. The 19th and 20th centuries brought miracles of discovery, electricity, evolution, psychology, the atom, each one peeling back another layer of mystery. But for every truth uncovered, a backlash followed. Society was not ready to live without its gods. Those who dared call themselves atheists were branded dangerous. Professors lost their positions. Writers were banned. Families disowned their own children. To doubt publicly was to invite exile. To question openly was to risk everything. In sermons and newspapers, atheism became a curse word, a synonym for chaos, corruption, and immorality. Believers were taught that disbelief was not just wrong, it was evil. But the misunderstanding grew even darker. In the 20th century, tyrants used the mask of godlessness to justify oppression of their own. Under Stalin, the word atheism was twisted, turned into a tool of control. Churches were demolished, yes, but not for freedom of thought. They were replaced with statues of men, not gods. Stalin didn't end religion. He replaced it with himself. His ideology became the new faith. His party, the new church. His word, the new scripture. And so for decades, religious institutions in the West pointed to these horrors and said, "See, this is what happens without God." It was a lie, but an effective one. The crimes of totalitarianism were never born from atheism, but from the same disease that corrupts all belief, the worship of absolute authority. Yet propaganda blurred the lines. In films, in speeches, in classrooms, atheists were painted as cold, soulless, incapable of love or meaning. Faith was equated with virtue, doubt with decay. Even as science expanded human understanding, religion adapted its rhetoric. It stopped trying to silence reason and started trying to absorb it, claiming that faith and fact could coexist as long as reason knew its place. But slowly, a new generation of thinkers began reclaiming the word atheist, not as rebellion, not as arrogance, but as honesty. They argued that disbelief wasn't a rejection of morality. It was the courage to seek truth without permission. Writers like Bertrand Russell and Carl Sagan spoke gently, inviting people to wonder without fear of blasphemy. They replaced sermons with science, punishment with perspective. The Cold War may have painted atheism as a threat, but beneath the surface, it was becoming something else, a quiet declaration of intellectual integrity. Atheists began forming communities, not temples, but spaces for free thought, for ethics without dogma, for compassion without commandment. They proved that you could love without heaven, stand for justice without prophecy, and find awe in reality itself. Because disbelief, at its core, was never about denial. It was about freedom. the freedom to think, the freedom to question, the freedom to live truthfully, even when truth made you an outcast. For centuries, faith had demanded conformity. Now, reason demanded courage. And that courage, to doubt, to speak, to stand alone, became the quiet revolution that reshaped modern thought. But in the 21st century, something extraordinary happened. Doubt became global. The 21st century opened a new frontier, not just in technology, but in thought. For the first time in human history, knowledge was no longer locked behind pulpits or universities. It lived in the open, in our hands, in our pockets, in the glow of every screen. The internet became humanity's second printing press, but this time, unstoppable. Ideas that once took centuries to travel could now cross continents in seconds. And with that speed came a quiet revolution. People began thinking for themselves, together. Questions that were once whispered are now trending topics. Skepticism, once punished, is now part of global conversation. The universe, once a mystery wrapped in myth, has become our greatest teacher. Through the lens of science, we've seen galaxies collide, watched stars die, and traced our own origins to dust older than the Earth itself. Space exploration has turned what was once worship into wonder. The cosmos no longer demands belief. It invites curiosity. Neuroscience has revealed that consciousness isn't divine breath. It's the orchestra of billions of neurons, firing in patterns that create thought, love, and memory. Not a soul trapped in flesh, but the universe becoming aware of itself. And as our understanding grew, so did our empathy. Modern atheism is no longer defined by what it rejects. It's defined by what it affirms. Curiosity, compassion, responsibility, freedom. The new atheists don't stand against belief. They stand for truth, wherever it leads. They don't claim certainty. They celebrate inquiry. They don't mock meaning. They search for it in the real, the observable, the human. Across the world, a quiet demographic shift began. The rise of the mics. Nones. Those who check none when asked their religion. Not because they've given up on meaning, but because they've outgrown inherited answers. This movement isn't a war on faith. It's the next step in its evolution. A realization that morality, purpose, and awe don't vanish when gods do. They deepen. They expand. We no longer need heaven to feel small before beauty. We no longer need fear to live ethically. We no longer need eternal life to find value in this one. Atheism today isn't disbelief. It's a commitment to honesty. To say, I don't know, when the truth is uncertain. To say, I was wrong, when evidence demands it. To say, I care, because empathy needs no commandments. Science and skepticism have become the twin lights of modern reason. They remind us that the universe is not cold, it's breathtaking. And that being human is not a flaw, it's a privilege. The digital age has given atheism a global voice. Communities once isolated now share stories, doubts, and discoveries. Former believers find solidarity. Scientists, artists, and everyday thinkers celebrate a shared pursuit, understanding what is, not what we're told must be. And perhaps the most profound change of all, atheism has learned humility. It no longer seeks to replace religion with certainty. It seeks coexistence through honesty, because truth doesn't need temples. It needs transparency. And meaning doesn't come from submission. It comes from participation, from the shared act of asking, learning, and evolving. We've entered an age where belief and non-belief can finally meet without fear. A believer can look through a telescope and feel awe. An atheist can stand in a cathedral and feel wonder. Both can see the same stars and whisper the same word, beautiful. This is the age of reason, reborn. An era where knowledge is sacred, curiosity is courage, and truth. Truth is the only thing worth worshiping. In the end, this story isn't about disbelief. It's about rediscovery. For centuries, we searched for meaning in the sky, in gods who watched, in heavens that promised, in myths that comforted. But when we finally turned our gaze from the heavens to the earth, we didn't lose meaning. We found it. We stopped worshiping stars and started reaching for them. We stopped fearing death and started valuing life. We stopped praying for miracles and started creating them. Every heartbeat, every act of kindness, every question that leads to understanding. These became our sacred moments. Atheism didn't strip the world of wonder. It revealed that wonder was never divine property. It was human all along. Meaning we discovered isn't something given to us. It's something we build together. In science, we found humility, the courage to admit we don't know everything. In empathy, we found connection, the realization that love doesn't need eternity to matter. In reason, we found peace, not the peace of blind faith, but of clear sight. Because honesty, even when it hurts, is more sacred than obedience born from fear. We no longer kneel before mystery. We walk with it. We no longer seek gods to justify our goodness. We choose goodness because it makes life worth living. Atheism wasn't the death of belief. It was belief's evolution. A shift from worship to wonder, from submission to understanding, from fear of the unknown to love of the real. And maybe that's the truest faith of all, not in unseen deities, but in the visible miracle of existence itself. So when someone asks, what does an atheist believe? The answer is simple. We believe in truth, in courage, in compassion, in the astonishing beauty of being here for this brief and precious moment. If this journey challenged your assumptions or expanded your view, join our channel membership. It helps us keep exploring ideas most are too afraid to touch. Because the story of atheism isn't about what we lost. It's about what we finally learned to see, that meaning was never in the heavens. It was in us.